Domi Reversi is Latin for returning home, but in One Piece, it actually means something different. If you take the original Japanese kanji for this ability that were introduced in chapter 1150, which were Kokten Shihai, then put them in Google Translate, what comes out is, and I quote, the most broken ability in One Piece. This in my opinion is a pretty accurate name for this power. Imu in this latest chapter was able to use Domi Reversi on Rocksteady Sebek, within one page turning him into a demon. This scene essentially confirmed that Domi Reversi is the strongest ability in all of One Piece, but also that Imu basically has to be the strongest character in this story. The reason for this is very simply because of how strong Rocksteady Sebek himself is. In the very first chapter where we heard about him, Sebek was introduced as Goldie Roger's greatest enemy, a terrorist who wanted to usurp the world government, and a pirate captain of a crew filled with people who would in the future become emperors of the sea. When this chapter was released in 2019, this was unprecedented. For years, these same emperors had been the pinnacle of power in One Piece, and were, quote, the greatest pirates in the world. Yet here was this man who had 3 of the 4 emperors as his mere underlings. This created a mystique around Sebek as this otherworldly figure, someone most readers had never even imagined could exist in the story. And this image stuck. In a poll I did on my channel over 2 years ago, the majority believed that it was actually Sebek, not Whitebeard or Garp, who was Roger's greatest rival. One might think that a character with expectations this high for him could never actually live up to them, but honestly, if I did this same poll today, I am confident that Sebek would not only win again, but that he'd even get a higher percentage. This is because now in 2025, the manga has finally revealed Rox in the flesh, and it turns out that all the legends about him were more than true. In Sebek's very first chapter, it is revealed that he infiltrated a Reverie summit and single-handedly defeated a Navy admiral. This is a feat that has only ever been replicated once or twice in all of One Piece, but where Akainu needed 10 days and to level an entire island to defeat an admiral, Sebek managed to do the same in an afternoon, but then also had enough strength left to clash with the strongest king in Elbaf's history immediately after the fight. While there were allusions to this before, Sebek's introductory chapter also essentially confirmed that all of his legendary crewmates had been basically forced to follow Sebek after he'd personally beaten them. But the truly crazy part was that all of this was Sebek just at the start of his pirating career, where he still had years of growth left even after these accomplishments. Sebek not only continued amassing more followers, but his personal strength also grew immensely in these years. When Sebek had his rematch with King Harald on Elbaf, Sebek now was able to completely overpower Harald on his home island. Later still, Sebek also gave a humiliating defeat to Saint Vigarland Garling, who himself in the future not only became the leader of the Gods' Knights, but also one of the government's 5 warrior gods. In light of all of this, the narrator fittingly notes that Rox's time on the seas was undisputedly his era, despite the fact that even Goldie Roger was sailing the waters at the same time as him. But in spite of all of this, in spite of all of Sebek's strength and accolades, it still only took 1 page for Imu to turn Rox into his lapdog. I'm sorry if it went on for a bit too long, but I just tried to sell the weight of what Imu did in this scene. If even Sebek cannot resist the power of Domi Reversi, then on paper, Imu could do the same thing to virtually any character in the story. For example, if Imu were there, right in the manga's very first scene in chapter 1, Imu could have paid a visit to Roger right before his execution, and in the next scene, Goldie Roger, the Pirate King, would be obeying Imu's commands better than the 5 elders. For another example, when the government later heard that Shanks and Whitebeard were having a meeting, Imu could have asked Kunko to fly over there, then touch down on the Moby Dick with her body and gotten himself 2 demonic emperors for the price of 1. This is also genuinely not that much of an exaggeration. In every instance where Imu has used Domi Reversi, it has taken him just an instant, and no visible effort to turn the target into his obedient demon, no matter if it's a random giant, or one of the strongest pirates who's ever lived. Domi Reversi also does not appear to be just a temporary state, as Imu commands Dorian Brokey to take over Elbaf, and to rule the country as his puppets, meaning that in theory, the effects of Domi Reversi could potentially last for years, if not forever. The only confirmed cost to Domi Reversi is a part of the target's lifespan, though this does not appear to be a huge part, as without repeating myself too much, Imu believes that Dorian Broggie will live long enough to be able to rule Elbaf even after the transformation. But I have not even talked about the craziest part yet. It is not just that these characters become loyal to Imu, but Domi Reversi also makes the target significantly stronger. Broggie was in downright ecstasy after tasting his newfound demonic powers, as were all the other giants who had been turned into demons. This exact same thing should happen to Sebek as well, where he's not only going to become Imu's puppet, but Sebek after Domi Reversi should be stronger than he's ever been. Looking at all of this, I genuinely do not see how Domi Reversi is not the strongest ability ever introduced in One Piece. It honestly makes any other ability in the story seem inconsequential. Just to for example compare it to Luffy's strongest ability, where Luffy had to put forth Herculean effort to finally beat a severely wounded Kaido with the Bashran gun. Imu in his shoes could have not only submitted a full health Kaido in one page, but Imu would have also made Kaido follow his every command afterwards. I am genuinely trying to rack my brain over what ability in the story would even come close to this. Joy Boy's Conqueror's Haki Knot left even Imu himself shaken, but practically speaking, even someone like Saint Saturn still looked perfectly fine after taking its initial shock. By contrast, Domi Reversi is an instant enslavement button that works even on characters significantly stronger than the elders. This kind of puts the rest of the story into perspective. While the One Piece world and the readers of the story mainly hear about the legendary power of figures like Roger, Rox and the Emperors, it is easy to forget that there also exists this God Emperor figure in this story, who's been alive for hundreds of years, and is able to brush off all these legendary figures like they belonged in a different series. Admittedly, this also raises a lot of concerns about Imu. He could very well be too strong of a character for One Piece. Imu's powers put the manga in a serious pinch, where it now has to figure out a reasonable way for someone to beat a character with this godly level of power. On top of this, another pinch this puts the manga in is having the lore of the entire story still make sense after Imu is revealed to be this strong. The world government and Imu have made it clear that their ultimate goal is complete dominion over the One Piece planet, and they have gone on record saying that they want to get rid of all pirates and other criminals. But if Imu is this incomparably stronger than all other characters in this story, it really makes me question why the world government in the hundreds of years they've been around hasn't already succeeded in taking over the planet. But I also think I have an idea what the answer is going to be. Personally, I actually do not think Imu is as powerful as those last few chapters have made him appear. Years ago, I was reading the Skypiea arc for the first time. I got to the scene where it was revealed that the Straw Hats had come to a land that was ruled by a god. When I read further along, this god actually turned out to be a real character, who could smite down anyone just for speaking ill of him, and who could not even be harmed by any of the other characters. This genuinely did seem like One Piece had crossed some line by introducing a character who could not be beat. When I however read even further along, it turned out that this was all just smoke and mirrors. The god was just a man like any other we'd met in this story, and there was a trick to all of his powers. A trick that when figured out, made this man very much beatable. I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but Enel was hardly the last character like this in One Piece. At this point, you need more than 2 hands to count all the times this has happened, where a new enemy is introduced, and they at first look invincible, yet every single time, the curtains eventually fall, this character's secret is revealed, and it turns out that they are just like everyone else. I can't really base this on anything more than what I just said, but I don't think Imu will be any different. I fully believe that there once again is going to be just another man pulling the levers behind the wizard. Even if I am right though, this wouldn't really take anything away from how obscenely powerful of an ability Domi Reversi is. No matter what else he may be, Imu controlling someone as strong as Sebek is pretty much the single best feat in all of One Piece. But I also do not think that even Domi Reversi is unbeatable. I think that it too will be revealed to have its own critical weakness. You can actually click here to watch a whole video where I go over this idea, and why Sebek could have very literally been the only character Imu could turn into a demon on God Valley. If Imu doing Domi Reversi on Sebek is the strongest feat in this story, I think we might have also gotten the second strongest feat in this very chapter, with this combined mecha attack all these pirates and Garp did on Imu. Just to give some context on the insane level of power at display here, This was the first time we'd ever seen Whitebeard doing a named attack in the story. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this same thing would also go for Sebek, which on paper could mean that even in isolation, these are the strongest attacks we've ever seen Whitebeard and Sebek perform in the entire series. This same thing arguably goes for Garp, where the only other time we've seen him do a galaxy impact was as an old man, where Garp himself called it shabby work due to his age. But I honestly think the craziest part about this page is that we know Sebek's Conqueror's Haki is able to severely damage the immortal celestial dragons, yet with Imu, it didn't really appear to work. To me, Imu basically took this massive attack, like he was a Logia user absorbing basic damage. He didn't bleed, scream, or really give any of the classic One Piece signs of a character being hurt. This clearly means that what Imu is doing here is something beyond what we've seen the Elders and the Gods Knights do with regeneration, but I also think this chapter gave a small hint to what this something could be. Before going over this hint though, I'll ask you point blank to subscribe to this channel. I haven't done this in a while, and I'm really interested to see how asking for subscribers affects my analytics. When Imu impales Sebek, Sebek says that it does not even hurt. Also, earlier in the chapter, the Roger pirates say that the damage they'd received from Imu was interesting. I think this is also what the original Japanese said, where even though the raw side rate are very low quality, I'm pretty sure Roger's men said Kiyomi Bukai, which very literally just means interesting. I think this could all be connected to the way Imu chose to appear on God Valley. Instead of taking over Saturn's body like he did with Kunko, Imu seemingly manifested himself through Saturn. Essentially, it could be that Imu may not actually be physically on God Valley, but this is more like he's using a hologram, where Imu can either take or deliver real damage. This isn't the first time we've seen Imu attacking other characters, but when we saw it the first time during the Reverie, Imu genuinely hurt Sabo and Cobra, whereas now on God Valley, weaker characters are saying that they are pretty much fine after Imu's attacks. This could be related to what I talked about earlier in this video, where even with Imu, his seemingly godly powers are just smoke and mirrors. Imu could have well known how insanely powerful these God Valley characters were, which is why he may have decided to appear in this invulnerable state, for no other reason than his own safety. Just to point it out, if Imu truly wanted to come to God Valley as close to his maximum power as possible, he could have very likely asked Saturn to summon him via a magic circle. Part of the reason why Imu chose to appear in this invulnerable form would actually be that we already know Imu is frightened of the past and Joy Boy, but this fear could also extend to Davy Jones, which is why Imu didn't want to take any risk in physically coming to the same island as Sebek. This is an interesting character quirk of Imu's, where just like he in the present story sees Luffy as Joy Boy, Imu in this chapter also sees Sebek as Davy Jones. What makes this interesting to me is that Imu isn't as dumb as he appears. Imu actually does pay attention to the world, where he knows about pirates of much lower rank, like Dorian Broggy, by reputation, and is fully aware of the government's operations with people like Vegapunk. The simple answer is that Imu calling Sebek Davy Jones is just his trauma talking, but a more interesting answer is that Imu may know something we don't. Concepts like reincarnation and inherited will may actually be more literal than we think, and there could be a much stronger link than we might have thought between Sebek and Davy Jones, as there might also be between Luffy and Joy Boy. It's a bit unclear whether Saturn or Imu is in control in this scene, but honestly, I think both of them are pretty much attacking the Marines and pirates alike just because they can. We already knew Saturn was like this since Egghead, but this is a really interesting hint at Imu's possible thoughts about the Navy. Since Imu is the founder of the world government, he could very well also be the creator of the Marines institution, but this scene reveals that he pretty much just sees the Marines as insects, just like how the celestial dragons tend to view everyone else from the lower world. If anyone is making a list, I think this is also foreshadowing Exhibit 43, of the Marines eventually turning on the celestial dragons at some point in the final saga. Imu's stunt here actually made one Marine flip already, where Imu and Saturn attacking the Marines was the thing that on God Valley finally made Garp turn on his bosses. This however raises so many questions about Garp's entire history in the story. I was honestly just brainstorming with my prior video about the government wiping Garp's memory after God Valley, but I am now almost starting to believe the idea. Garp attacking Imu is pretty much him crossing the Rubicon. For both Garp and the government, this should be the point of no return that would make them enemies for life. Yet from everything we know, Garp continued serving in the Marines after the God Valley incident, like nothing had happened. I really hope some of you can explain to me how this makes any sense, since I am really out of ideas here. Beyond the God Valley incident actually getting wiped from all of the participants' memories, I just have no idea how Garp could stay with the Navy, after basically attempting regicide. It is also not just that the government kept Garp around, but they even wanted to make him an admiral after God Valley. These being the same people who demoted Magellan for no reason, other than him failing to protect Impel Down against 2 future emperors. To move on from this point though, I think this chapter also pretty much buried 2 theories I'd made videos about on this channel. These were Shamrock and Shanks getting swapped at God Valley, and Roger and Garp getting turned into demons. The former I don't think can really happen at this point, since Dragon ended up losing Shanks, and Shanks got in the treasure chest by himself, which I think has to mean that Shanks had some name tag in his baby clothes, because the Roger pirates were later able to figure out his name. Roger and Garp could theoretically still be turned into demons, but I really don't think it is going to happen now. I brought this up in some video, but I just think there is no way these other God Valley characters could have survived against the Domi Reversi trio of Rox, Roger and Garp at the same time. I do have a bit of mixed feelings about how Dragon saving Shanks ended up playing out. My gut reaction was that this was a bit of an irrelevant side plot, where it specifically being Dragon who rescued Shanks really didn't seem to matter all that much in the end. On second thought though, I don't think this is true. If Dragon after God Valley later heard about a red-haired boy, exactly the same age as the one he rescued, being on Roger's ship, I think he could have connected the dots that this was the kid he'd rescued. Alternatively, an even simpler way Dragon could have done this is if he'd already learned Shanks' name on God Valley. So, I am fairly certain Dragon does know that Red Hair Shanks is the kid he saved, and that this still opens the door for all of the potential of the 2 of them connecting at some point in the 30 years between the God Valley incident and the present story. I kind of like the fact that Captain John knows when it's time to call it quits. He really wanted to be the one to rescue Shaggy, but is still willing to leave God Valley even without her as long as he gets his treasure. At this point, it really looks like Kaido and Whitebeard are the most/only loyal rocks pirates in the whole crew, where almost everyone else has at this point shown that they always put their own interest first. This has been going on for a few chapters now, but there's also a notable absence of Barbell in all of these rocks pirate scenes. Out of the whole crew, Barbell really is the odd man out, where he has so far had 0 impact on the One Piece story, which is really suspicious for a character who first appeared in the final saga. I was just spitballing when I made the video about Barbell being the man marked by flames, but now I almost feel like I should make a follow-up video, where I think he may very well end up commandeering the black slave ship we saw earlier in this flashback, and eventually go get the 4-Road Poneglyph from Fishman Island. The dialogue between Sebek and Imu had really huge implications in almost every sentence. I at first had no idea what to think of Sebek calling Imu the king of the bilge rats, as I didn't even know what bilge rats were before googling it for this video. Apparently, they are very simply rats who live on ships, but the term can apparently also be used for someone of low status. There really are so many ways you could go about theorizing why Sebek called Imu this, where maybe it's nothing more than Sebek thinking that the celestial dragons are all worthless, or perhaps it could be a reference to Imu actually being originally from low status. This is an idea I really like, where maybe Imu is originally just a commoner, where he could have used his possession powers to take over King Nerona Imu during the Void Century, and his entire identity is just a facade. One Piece is full of these kinds of rags to riches stories, but I really think this would be the most interesting one, where the immortal god emperor of the planet could in truth have started out as this common-born runt. Sebek also says that he has a promise that he needs to keep. Imu also seems to know what promise he is talking about, so Occam's razor would mean that this promise is related to Sebek wanting to become the king of the world. I think this potentially just adds more depth to Sebek's character, where even his ambition of world conquest isn't entirely for himself, or even just as retaliation by the Davy clan, but it is actually a long ago made promise to his people. It really reminds me of Joy Boy's broken promise to the Fishmen, where this is becoming a bit of a theme, with Imu essentially getting in the way of these legendary characters accomplishing their dreams, and he's seemingly next going to crush Shebex in this very flashback. I still am not necessarily completely on board with the idea of Sebek becoming a demon, but like with everything else, it really depends on the execution. I would at least hope that Sebek ultimately gets back some control, since a character as beastly as him dying as a complete puppet could be such a waste. Imu's words about his world being incomplete made me think of Vegapunk's message, which seemingly indicates that Imu just wants to sink the planet, and to live with the Holy Land being the only place with actual people. But I wonder if Imu's goals could go even deeper, since there are already hints of him being able to access separate worlds with the Abyss, and with him being able to bring forth demons from some other plane. I think this could all be ultimately boiled down to Imu just wanting to control everything. Another way to look at it is that because Imu is this self-isolationist recluse, he just wants to optimize everything, since that's really the only thing he knows and values. Though I suppose Imu still has at least some heart, if his feelings about Lily are any indication. This chapter also gave another funny example of Imu's temper, where at this point, Imu basically blows his fuse in every scene where things don't go his way. What a nerd. One last point about this chapter is that I'm glad One Piece finally found a capable user for the explosion fruit. Just kidding. The actual final point I want to make is that this chapter confirms that there is someone on Luffy's ship who has seen Imu, and it is Zeus. So, really, the God Valley memory wipe theory better end up being true. I can stomach the Straw Hats not talking to each other about important stuff only so much. Robin not telling any of the crew that Pluton was in one already made it feel like I'd been stabbed in the heart. But if Zeus all this time neglected to mention that, by the way, maybe watch out for this guy called Imu, my estimation of the average IQ of One Piece characters is going to plummet. I mentioned it a lot of times already, but definitely click here to watch my God Valley memory fruit theory, because it no joke might come true at this point, with so many characters present in this flashback seemingly having completely forgotten about what happened. Thanks a lot to all my members for the loot, but also thank you to everyone who watched this video to the end.